Hi, my name is Didier. Welcome to the lab. We are at La Maison du Whisky over in Paris. And today, because the Chinese New Year is coming up, we are going to talk about baijiu, and this is a typically Chinese spirit. So we've got our friend from Ming Spirits with us. Hi, how are you doing?
Hi, this is Derek Sandhouse. I'm one of the co-founders of Ming River Sichuan Baijiu and the author of a couple of books about Chinese alcohol and drinking culture. Pleased to be with you.
And so, let's find out a little bit more about baijiu. So, first of all, how would you explain baijiu to someone in a single sentence?
In a single sentence, I would say baijiu is a family of distilled grain spirits from China, notable for their clear color and complex flavor.
Right, so it's the most consumed spirit in the world, more than whiskey, vodka, and company. Obviously, it's mainly consumed in China, but I guess in the West, most of us the only experience we have with baijiu is through one very famous brand, but there's actually a whole variety of different styles. Could you tell us a little bit more about this variety, if it's regional, depending on the ingredients as well?
Absolutely. So when we talk about baijiu, what we're essentially talking about is any type of traditional distilled spirit made in a traditional Chinese style. So in China, several different styles of liquor developed over several hundreds of years. So in different parts of China, they make different styles of baijiu. And today, there are 12 officially recognized categories of baijiu. 4 of them make up the overwhelming majority of baijius, and those are what we call light aroma, strong aroma, sauce aroma, and rice aroma baijiu. Rice aroma is the most mild, and it's probably somewhere in its flavor between like a sake and a soju, and that comes from southeastern China, particularly Guangdong and Guangxi provinces. Light aroma baijiu is a drier, crisper, dried fruit sweetness kind of baijiu, and that comes from northern China, particularly Beijing and Shanxi. And then you have in the southwest the other 2 primary styles of baijiu. That's strong aroma baijiu from Sichuan and sauce aroma baijiu from Guizhou. Strong aroma tends to be very bright and floral, and sauce aroma tends to be very savory and umami with lots of like mushroomy, kind of cheesy flavors.
And so in China, there's this very big ganbei kind of toasting culture when people drink baijiu during meals, for example. In Europe and in the West in general, I've seen a lot of baijiu producers kind of at cocktail shows trying to promote drinking baijiu in cocktails. And actually, when I tried Ming River, it made sense to me because it kind of reminds me of this Jamaican high ester, funky, fruity profile. Where does this profile come from? Is it also from the fermentation?
The comparison between Jamaican rums and strong aroma baijius like Ming River is a really, really common one. And that's because it has this really fruity, flowery, funky, complex flavor that makes it super popular in China and very easy to work with in cocktails, particularly tiki-style cocktails. Now, the way that they produce this particular flavor comes through the use of very long and continuous fermentation. So they mix together the mash. In this case, it's a sorghum grain mash that's mixed together with wild yeast and bacteria, and it's left to ferment for about 2 to 3 months at a time. They take part of the mash out and distill it, then they mix the rest of the mash together with fresh grains. And then they distill all of that, put it back in the fermentation pit that they took it out of with more yeast, and then they ferment it again for 2 to 3 months. So they do this over and over and over again over time, and this develops both really, really fruity, high ester bacterial sweetness, but you also get a lot of that funkiness which comes from the repeated use of the mud fermentation pits.
And so speaking of fermentation, it's dry state fermentation and distillation. Actually, this is something very specific to baijiu. Kind of took me a while to wrap my head around it. So could you explain a little bit in simple terms?
The secret ingredient for making any kind of traditional Chinese alcohol is something that's called chu. That's spelled Q-U. And all it is essentially grains that have been mixed together with water and allowed to naturally decompose. And while they're doing this, they absorb whatever microorganisms live in the air. So that's essentially three things. You have mold, yeast, and bacteria. And with those three things, you can create a really interesting complex alcohol. How this works is what we call solid state fermentation and then later solid state distillation. So all you do for this is you take the grain, you steam it, and then you mix it together with pulverized chu. And what happens is that the starch that is in the grain is converted into sugar by the mold, while the yeast in the chu converts the sugar into alcohol. And then the alcohol combines with the bacteria to create the esters and the aldehydes that give it its really interesting complex flavor. Finally, in order to distill this solid mash that you have with the alcohol and the aldehydes and the esters in it, is you put the solid mash in a Chinese still. And this functions like a vegetable or a dumpling steamer, where it's got a slotted bottom and you pile the grains on top, you put the still on top of boiling water, and as the steam rises up through the mash, it heats up the alcohol, vaporizes it, and allows you to capture it, condense it back into a liquor that's usually between 50 and 70% alcohol by volume, and that's what we would call a baijiu.
And so I've noticed kind of parallels and similarities with other Asian spirits such as shochu or soju in Korea, which is, for example, the fact that they're usually not aged in oak, but sometimes other types of vessels, as well as using, instead of malting, maybe there's using some certain types of molds from an external source. Do you see or have you seen any influence from one culture to the other, or do you think this is something that we'll see in the future?
It's a great observation. Before baijiu was called baijiu, Chinese called it shaojiu, which means burnt alcohol. This is the same word in Chinese as soju in Korean or shochu in Japanese. And the reason I bring that up is because they are all part of the same family of distilled East Asian spirits. So what these three families of spirits have in common is that, at least traditionally, they were all made from grains and they were all fermented using wild yeast and other microorganisms. In Japan, they still do this today with what's called koji, whereas in Korea, they still make some traditional styles of soju, which are very, very similar to a light aroma baijiu. But today, most sojus are going to be closer to a vodka, where they're pot distilled up to very high proofs and then watered back down. So shochu and baijiu certainly have a lot more similarities today than they do with soju, but all three of these spirits are popular throughout Southeast Asia.
All right, well, thank you for answering all our questions. Goodbye.
Thanks very much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. Ganbei.
For you at home, if you like what you see, give us a thumbs up, follow us for more. And the question of the day for the comments is, have you ever tried baijiu? And what did you think of it? So, give us your answers in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.